Good morning. It's on. Go. Well, Thomas's talk has, already taken me to spaces where I haven't been, so I'm really looking forward to what else we learn today. But as I was putting together what I'm going to talk about this morning, I started thinking back to where I come from. And I grew up in rural West Sussex, on the Sussex Downs. And at that time, I knew three things about New Zealand. Firstly, I knew about dentists. Every dentist I ever met in Chichester came from Otago University. So I knew New Zealand was really good at producing dentists. Secondly, I knew about the All Blacks. I come from a Scottish family. So I knew that Scotland had never beaten the All Blacks. My dad made that very clear to me. I also knew that you beat England every now and then. So that was another thing I knew about New Zealand. And the only other thing I knew about New Zealand was that you had cows, they ate grass, and they used to sing and dance in the fields because that's what Anchor told me. And therefore the butter we ate came from New Zealand. The reality is, though, when you think about where we're going, where we need to go to, that's probably more than most people in the world today know about New Zealand and know about where we are as a country and what our opportunities are. What I want to do today is really talk about how I see New Zealand's place in the world, the challenge that we have in New Zealand, and then how that works over the next 25, 30 years in this world that Thomas has just described to us of constant and unprecedented change. And for you as leaders of the primary sector of New Zealand's agribusiness sector, if we don't understand how the world is changing and recognise that what we do today will not get us to where we want to be tomorrow, the reality for this country becomes very challenging. Remember, we are the only developed country in the world that relies on the primary sector to provide our schools, provide our roads, provide our hospitals, and support the standard of living we expect. So, let's go forward, see if that works. We'll do it this way. So, let's just put a bit of context around how New Zealand sits in the world from my perspective. As a country, we have some very significant strengths. We're an easy country to do business with. We have high education participation. In fact, if you look at us on a global basis, we are about the best in the world at educational participation. We have about 99% of our kids manage to get to school every day. Great quality of life. Just with talking with our guests last night that are here, the ability to look over the harbour, we take that for granted, but it's actually really good. Low corruption and a very straight line into some of the fastest growth markets in the world, into China, into Southeast Asia, into India. However, when you contrast that, we have some real challenges. We have a very weak innovation system. Now I think we suffer from the curse of the number 8 wire, as I refer to it. The fact that we love the eureka moment, but we don't necessarily recognise that innovation is a process and needs to be consistently invested in and recognised as being properly resourced. We rank in the mid-60s in terms of availability of scientists and engineers. For a developed country, that is not acceptable. We don't have an international city. We don't have a city where people will intentionally place their global head offices or their regional head offices because there's a benefit to being here. We need to create that hub, that vibe that will attract those sort of people. And while most of our kids do manage to get to school, they don't do very much when they're there, unfortunately. We rank 32nd out of 35 in the OECD for educational attainment. We need an education system that's developing people ready to live in the world that we are going to move into. Our incomes are low by international standards. We have an average GDP per capita here of around about $40,000, $42,000. That compares to Australia in the 60s, Singapore in the 50s. We need to bring our income up. And that means we need to have scale. Our businesses are not big enough necessarily for the size of the companies we're dealing with. And just to put that in context, we produce in New Zealand enough food to feed 40 million people, give or take a bit. Our mission, and we have no choice but to accept this mission, is to work out how we make ourselves relevant to the diet of 800 million people. Why is that important? It's important because those 800 million people need to be the most affluent consumers in the world. They need to be the people that buy food because it adds aspiration to their lifestyle. We can't feed the world, but we can provide the spark, the excitement to somebody's diet. And from my perspective, what we need to get into the mindset of is 5% of the diet, 800 million people. If we can start working out how we supply those people and the solutions we bring to them, that creates a real opportunity for us. The challenge, as Tom has already illustrated, is the world is changing incredibly rapidly. And I've got on this slide here just a few things that have changed in the last 6 to 8 months around how the world's evolving. The couple of ones I just want to touch on. Asda, Jamie Oliver. Interesting example. Asda is obviously a UK subsidiary of Walmart, the world's biggest grocer. They've done an arrangement driven by Jamie Oliver, which they call Beautiful on the Inside. It is the quest for the wonky vegetable. And what they've done is they've worked out now, and this has been amazingly successful for them, that they've now scaled this up. They've worked out it makes no difference if you sell a carrot that's the perfect length and the perfect color, or you sell one that's short or long and squint or slightly off color or slightly bruised. Consumers will still buy them. And if you provide a slightly lower price, they'll buy them in much bigger quantities. So if you think about what they've achieved, they've actually had a significant re-engineering of their thinking. Farmers are now getting paid £300 a tonne for something they were giving away for free in terms of their non-Class A vegetables. Asda have new sales. They can sell more product to more customers. And Jamie Oliver's involved here because the real issue. He's able to improve the nutrition of the population because people that couldn't afford vegetables now can. And that's an important thing we need to take note of, because the world is not going to be changed necessarily by the big companies doing innovative stuff. It's going to be changed by the social entrepreneur that has a goal of improving nutrition, fixing the fact we have 800 million people in the world that don't have enough food. Another one that I think is really important to New Zealand that we need to pick up and get our minds around is the Fairlife situation with Coca-Cola. For those of you who don't know, Fairlife is a dairy company based in Chicago. It's only a small player in the US, but it is the game changer. Because what they've worked out is a process to filtrate milk. And by doing that, they're taking sugar out of the milk, they're adding protein into the milk, and they're taking the lactose out. So they're creating an incredibly high protein, low sugar beverage. And Coca-Cola like this and have invested in the company. And Coca-Cola's global consumer relations director was quoted just a week or so ago at an investor conference saying this Fairlife product will rain money for Coca-Cola. This is something they're now rolling across the United States, and they obviously will look at how they take it out across the world as a global brand. Coke don't go into something to be number 8. Coke go in to be number 1. I think this is a game changer for the dairy sector and something that we need to realize very, very relevant to where we position our products into the future. A couple of other ones I'll just run through quickly. ThinkSec, a company I came across last week. They've created insect powder. And I'm a big fan that insects are the future for protein in terms of replacing a lot of our base load of animal proteins just because as animal protein gets too expensive to produce. They're low environmental impact, high efficiency of conversion to biomass into protein. And this ThinkSec company is grinding them up and selling them now. And we're going to test out MPI. We've ordered some to see if it gets over the border because we want to see what the chocolate brownie made by insects tastes like. Philadelphia Cowshare, a little innovative startup in Philadelphia, doing some really interesting stuff. They're farmers that like to farm, but don't necessarily want to own stock. So they've created a model to sell a part of an animal to a consumer, building a direct consumer between the animal and the consumer. They know where their food's going to come from. They're going to take a quarter and eighth for whole of whatever they've paid for. Interesting model though, because you think about the farmer, completely changed their whole business model. They're being paid up front for what they're growing rather than a month or 2 or 3 months after the animal's been sent to the works. A complete re-engineering of the farming process. We've already touched, and we'll touch in greater detail later today about our ability to produce synthetic foods, alternative foods, novel proteins. The blue sort of shape there is an organization called MoveFree, which is a San Francisco-based startup that's looking at how it can produce dairy products without involving cows. So synthetically engineering in a factory and delivering a dairy equivalent protein. I think that's really important we get our minds around the sort of stuff Mark will talk to us later around these alternative food sources. They are going to be game changers for us. And I honestly believe with synthetics we have two choices. We can either really get on board with synthetics and participate and invest and look at the opportunities, and I think they sit very naturally with our natural food products. The other choice for us is to do what the wool farmers did 40 years ago and basically say nobody will ever buy a carpet made of oil. Nobody will buy a synthetic carpet. Well, we put our head in the sand that time, and now 97% of carpets sold around the world are made from oil. We can't afford to do that in relation to food. We need to participate. And we need to recognize it's not going to be the big players that are going to change the game. Nemo's Garden is a group of Italian divers, and they've worked out a really neat way to float a little greenhouse about 5 meters below the surface. And it's got a water filtration system so they can desalinate the water. They get the right amount of light. The temperature's just perfect at 5 meters below the water. And suddenly they've worked out they can take agriculture off the land and float it in hydrospheres below the water. The reality is, as Tom's already pointed out, agriculture's not necessarily going to happen where it's always happened. It's going to happen in different places. It's going to be devolved into the way we live in different ways. And we need to get our mind around that. And the final one I'm just going to touch on is the Australian government. And you may think, God, what's he, hardly the most innovative organisation other than the fact they turn prime ministers over at a rate of knots. But the reality is, the Australian government have recognised agriculture as a strategic to their future. They've put in place a white paper that sets out a vision of how they will maintain the competitiveness of their agricultural sector. They've changed the threshold to tell investors our assets are strategically important. They've dropped what you need. You used to be able to buy $250 million worth of land without it being looked at by the government. That's now 15 million. They understand the strategic vision agriculture and the strategic importance of agriculture. We need to get that position as well. So let's just bring this in terms of, I think there's sort of 5 key forces we need to be aware of. Already the connected devices have been touched on this morning, and the reality of that to me is they're going to drive accessibility. So we're going to be looking at food on demand. The idea of somebody going to a supermarket and buying a week or 2 weeks worth of groceries and then living with that and eating those, I think that's going to rapidly fade away. It's all going to be about delivery now. I've put Sprig up there. They're an interesting little startup operating in Palo Alto and in Chicago, delivering fresh food, organic food in compostable containers. So, really delivering food that, people want to eat. It looks great. The whole vision's great. My Food Bag's another example we have here in New Zealand. I think their model still needs to evolve a bit, but they're moving towards that instantaneous food on demand. Second theme for me is boundaries. I think we still think too much about our traditional sovereign boundaries. The reality of the world that we're going to describe today is that sovereign boundaries become less and less relevant. The boundary of an opportunity, the boundary of a problem is defined by the scope of that problem. And we need to make sure we're gearing our institutions, our solutions to match the opportunities. Biggest issue for me around this is counterfeiting. We rely on the integrity of our product being absolutely unimpeachable. It's well known that the amount of Manuka honey sold in China is way beyond the amount of Manuka honey we sell to China, because it's easy to stick a sticker on there, and the financial incentive to do so is great because the price differential is so high, but it creates an experience that will mean customers won't come back. I've got Zespri up there. They have a challenge ensuring the integrity of the gold kiwi fruit because, again, it's easy to print a box, it's easy to stick a sticker on, it's easy to counterfeit. We need to ensure that we're working globally to find the boundary of that problem and solve it the way we need to solve it. Third theme for us is communities. And for me, a community, and we need to change our perspective on community. Community should not be considered to be China, and we're looking to sell to the average Chinese consumer. The reality of the problem we face and the need of the focus we need to have is our community dissects itself into so many sub-niches, be that by age, religion, gender, education, wealth, whichever way you want to segment it. We cannot focus on the average. We will miss everybody if we focus on the average. Our goal must be to focus on the niches we can win in. And that means we've got to spend a lot of time working with consumers to identify the right niche. You know, one obvious example to me is religion. And if you think that by 2050 there'll be 3.8 billion people around the world eating in accordance with religious orders, be that halal, be that kosher, be that vegetarianism, the opportunity that creates if we can cut into that and start to relate to those people is huge. Fourth theme that we need to think about is disruption. And the reality is the world is changing faster and faster than it's ever done before. We're going to demonstrate that today very clearly. What that means is the idea of a cash cow, a product that you can live on for the next 20, 30 years and milk the profits from, has gone. As soon as you're making good profits, somebody will try to disrupt you. We've already seen that in food printing. I won't dwell there much longer. But the reality is change will come very, very much more quickly than it has. Final theme for me that stands out as being critical to how we think about the future is environment. Conversation has changed here quite dramatically. The conversation used to be about we do the right thing by the environment because the rules say we have to. Over the last 2 years, we've begun to see that message changing to very much more we do the right thing about the environment because it's the right thing to do. And that step forward is critical in terms of actually making a situation that is valuable to us. Because if we understand we're doing the right thing by the environment because it's the right thing to do, that is a great story for consumers. It's a point at which we can start to command a premium. And one example we see with our global clients is biodiversity. If you're trying to sell to a Unilever, you're trying to sell to a Nestle, they're now focused on, are you doing the right things to preserve your biodiversity? So your cultural products, that wide heritage range of vegetables, for example, we can't just think monoculture. We need to think about the whole ecosystem and how we're maintaining the health of that if we're going to keep ourselves relevant. And then there's a range of other themes that come out very quickly. GM. We're half pregnant on GM, to be honest. We invest, $18, $20 million a year in R&D. At the same time, we don't quite want to use it, so our R&D goes and gets used overseas. I have no view which way is the right way to go with GM, other than to say we're trying to sell a small part of a diet to a very large number of high-value consumers. We need to make sure that our position on GM aligns to their position. And if we position ourselves into how they will pay us more for their products, that is probably the right opportunity for New Zealand. The internet provides us with a huge opportunity. The internet enables us to talk to every consumer in the world. And if you think about those 800 million people, they're the people that want to know where their food comes from. They're the people that want to have a relationship with the producers. They go to Whole Foods, they go to the farmers markets. I would argue that technology provides us a chance to provide a local food solution to the world. We can use the internet to tell our stories. We can tell them in a much greater way than you can do over the counter at a farmer's market. We can provide all the certification and integrity information they need. We can have a multiple way global conversation with them using social media. And the reality is e-commerce these days and all the technology coming around distribution means we can distribute anywhere very, very quickly. I think technology means that we can supply the world its delicatessen. We can become the local food producer to the world. That takes the retailers out of the equation and puts us in direct relationship with our consumers. I see that as a positive. We need to think about the sort of consumers we can sell our products to. And from my perspective, there's two key groups that stand out that's important to New Zealand. The over 65s, which there'll be 1.1 billion of them by 2030, and the urban consumers, where there's 1.3 million of them extra every single week, and that will continue to be the case between now and 2050. They need food in different ways. Let's just take the urban consumers. They're living in a shoebox. They're 2 hours away from where they work. They're commuting. They're eating on the go. They don't have a kitchen in their room. So when you bring all that together, how we make our food convenient, how we provide inspirational, exciting solutions to food service, how can you eat what you want to eat on the go will define how we sell to those consumers. If we understand what they need, we will do better. I've already mentioned it, I'll touch on it again. Integrity and transparency is critical. Trust is a bottom line. If we lose trust, we put ourselves in danger. But I think Ireland's doing a great job with Origin Green. I think there's a lot of work they can still do to evolve that program. But the reality is they have a consistent message and people are believing it. We need to get on board with the fact that collaborative initiatives like Origin Green probably need to form an important part of our future in New Zealand. Another theme that stands out for me is the fact that food is going to become an integral part of healthcare. The reality is we can't afford to keep funding curing people. And if you look globally, the emerging world, they're already starting to build healthcare systems based around prevention and wellness rather than cure. And food, therefore, becomes a real interesting solution to many people's health issues. Because if you think about it, 85% of the people over the age of 65 are managing chronic health conditions. So what we feed people becomes a really important part of what the health outcome is they have. So if we start to think about how we can engineer, how we can deliver food solutions that meet the requirements of people's health, then that is a really big step forward to us in adding value to our products. And the final step I just want to touch on in terms of some of these big picture questions is we need to really understand our consumers. We need to walk in our consumers' shoes, and if we do that, then we will understand the problems they face. And every time I come to this, the point that stands out to me is we need to understand what the future looks like for our dairy industry. It is our biggest export sector at the moment. And the reality is, if you look at the consumers, we're now selling a lot of powder to people that don't have a lot of water, with the expectation they'll use their limited water resources to rehydrate the powder, or the powder into a drinkable liquid. If I want to disrupt the dairy supply chain, I'm going to start selling that consumer liquid. And I think we need to really get our minds around the fact that liquid is going to be a large part of the future in the dairy sector. Coca-Cola are going to see to that, and we need to make sure we're on board with changing what we do to meet the needs of our consumers. So, to wrap up, I'm rather frustrated by the continued talk about export double. I don't think that's an ambitious goal. I don't think it's a goal that people can buy into. I think we need a strong vision for the primary sector. And as part of that vision, I believe it's achievable that the primary sector could generate export earnings of $100 billion by 2035. The reality is, though, we won't be exporting the same as we export today. And I think if we're going to get people on board in this industry with the talent we need, that message has got to be worked out into a full story. The reality is, though, as I put on there, I see some real opportunities for growth. I see, chilled, grass-raised beef and veal, hormone-free, as being our single biggest export category by 2035. I see real opportunities in natural dairy liquids. We need to change the game in that sector. I see apples and pears growing dramatically big, and I see that being driven by creating a beautiful craft cider industry. If you look globally, it fits into what people are looking for. A couple of other areas there that I see emerging. I see the climate changing, and as a consequence, I think the products that we grow, particularly north of Auckland, will change quite dramatically, and new opportunities will emerge to us, and we have to have our minds open to what those look like. But if you look at the medicinal plants, probably the fastest growing agricultural sector in North America at the moment, in terms of starting to legalize cannabis, the opportunities for us to create high value segments in some of those new emerging areas are quite significant. And Tasmania, for instance, is the world's leading producer of opiate poppies for medical grade opium or medical grade morphine. It's a huge business for them. Where are we thinking about the opportunities for us in some of those areas? And then things like sheep's milk, where we're seeing some real good innovation at the moment, algae, manufactured proteins, the synthetic foods, insect proteins, all of them will form part of our future. The reality is our $100 billion will be a very much more diverse, wider community than the community we have at the moment in terms of agriculture. But now's the time to start working out where we fit into that future, because first mover advantage is still available in many of these areas. So if we can take advantage of that, that's our future from my perspective. That's beyond our line of sight. Thank you.